recording as you are listening to this. We are recording on July 9th. If you are listening to this further on down the road and we say something that may not be completely accurate by the time you're listening to this, just understand we are discussing things with the current knowledge that we have in this moment on Tuesday, July 9th at 5:03 p.m. Central Standard Time. Coming to you live from West Tennessee, where we are sort of on the outer bands of this hurricane that's starting to dissipate. Like the weather that I'm getting right now in July is kind of nice. I'm not gonna lie. I know the hurricane wasn't nice for people in South Texas and up through Mexico, but the outer bands have cooled things off here. So usually July is suffocating and humid and hot in West Tennessee, and today it's actually been bearable. I am with President of Open Primaries, John Updike. John and I met each other about 2 or 3 years ago from an article I wrote with Tennessee Lookout, and we've stayed in touch. We've partnered on some op-eds, and he is an invaluable resource for me in trying to communicate the complexities of the primary voting system in Tennessee. And those complexities have gotten even more confusing somehow in the last year, and we will dive into that. But John, just to get right into it, I want to talk about something that happened about a week and a half ago. I was on vacation in Delaware, and it was the first presidential debate, and I wasn't sure if I was going to watch it or not. And it started, I think, 9 o'clock Eastern, which is perilously close to my bedtime. But I got in bed, I got my computer out, and I was like, I'm just going to tune in to this for a little bit. And I watched about 10 minutes, and I couldn't watch any more of it in real time. It was too hard for me to watch. You and I have had discussions since we've known each other, sort of about the perils of the two-party system and the tribalism that seems to have grown really since 16. And I think it was building before that, but really 16, it seemed like everything just got ripped apart. 2020, I think, pulled it even further apart, and so here we are in 2024. Almost feels like a worst-case scenario. So I think an appropriate place to start with this conversation about open primaries is our choices that we have right now for president of the United States. It seems like this could be the tipping point for things to start to shift some way or another, maybe a viable third party, or even people who are so entrenched in their own parties, at least they identify with a Republican or Democrat, starting to move away from that and towards the middle. What's your take on that? Have you had conversations with people who are just sort of throwing their hands up at this point and saying, okay, enough is enough?
Yes. I mean, there's a lot of mixed emotions going on in the country right now. And you're right. It's in some ways the conversation has focused on, hey, Biden is clearly not functional. He's not capable of running for president and nor being the president. And that was despite, several years of the Democratic Party kind of shielding Biden. Operation Bubble Wrap is what they called it. You just can't put the genie back in the bottle. And 50 million Americans got to see, and those of us like myself who have aging parents know this is not a pretty picture. And all of us are going to go through it, frankly, if we're lucky to reach that age. But part of what is so hard about this, in my opinion, is that there's many people in the Democratic Party now that are saying, oh, Joe needs to step down and we need to get some new candidates in there. And I certainly believe that. But these are the same people that kicked Robert Kennedy out of the Democratic Party. People forget he didn't start out as a third party candidate. He started in saying, I want to challenge Joe Biden in the primary. And the Democratic Party said, nope, no competition. We're not going to let you on the ballot. We're not going to have any primary debates. Then Congressman Dean Phillips came in and said, he said, look, I'm not qualified to be president. I just want there to be some competition and some dialogue about whether Biden is fit to be president. I want Biden to prove that he can do this. And they said, nope, we're going to kick you off the ballot. We're not even going to acknowledge your existence. So the Democratic Party, and I think this is we just have to be honest about it. The Democratic Party is not democratic. They don't
Mhm.
believe in democracy. They don't believe in an open process in which the people get to decide. This is my dog Jojo, who clearly
That's
agrees with me. That now they're faced with the consequences of that methodology. The methodology is, we, the Democratic insiders and the Biden team, we're going to decide this for the whole country, for the whole Democratic Party. And now they're in a pickle because Biden can't win. He can barely run. Jojo, he can barely run. And I don't know what they're going to do about it. I mean, there's brilliant articles. James Carville said there should be these town hall meetings that Bill Clinton and Barack Obama convene, and they should go through this process and they should be democratic. But how do you ask an undemocratic organization to suddenly become democratic? I don't know how you do that.
And they have a history with this. If you remember 16, basically they worked a way to where Bernie Sanders wasn't going to get the nomination. It was going to be Hillary because they didn't want Bernie to have that nomination. So they worked their way around that. Like they are, in the last 10 years, there's a pattern of that. And you're exactly right. And I've considered myself for a long time, even though we don't register as parties, and we'll get into that later in Tennessee, a Democrat. I've voted for a Democratic president since 2000. Governors all the way down the line, usually because my personal values line up with that. But over the last several years, I've felt myself tiptoeing away from that, not wanting to be linked to a party because no party's perfect. And as people have sort of split off into these tribes, I found myself not wanting to be a part of that. And I think a week and a half ago was the tipping point for me to officially just walk away completely and say that this is enough. I have as much anger right now toward the Democratic Party, even toward President Biden, almost as much as I do the other side. And I've been angry at the other side for a long time. But this is you're exactly right. This is undemocratic. It's essentially sticking up a middle finger to the people who have supported your party for a long time, who are just asking for another option. They're saying, no, we know better than you do. And you're exactly right. That's undemocratic. I put a long post on Facebook after the debate, essentially saying everything I just said. And I had someone comment. They were like, well, did you vote in the primary? I said, I did. I said, what were my options? And I don't even remember Dean Phillips being on the ballot in Tennessee. And he may have been.
He wasn't on the ballot in most of the states. They wouldn't let him on the ballot.
Yeah. So he wasn't even. So
Robert Kennedy out of the party.
Yeah, I had no options. And these are the things that I've been railing against the Tennessee state legislator about, who's a supermajority Republican for the last 3 or 4 years. But now the party that I most identify with is doing the same thing on the national level. And this is the line that I'm drawing. Like, I'm not saying I'm a free agent, but at this point, like, this isn't working. And now I believe the conversation we're about to have becomes even more important than it has been.
Absolutely. And there's two things that I think, for me, are very important. One, there was a bombshell that got no news coverage. But this happened last week. Gallup poll released their latest political identification survey. They do this every month. They've been doing it since the 70s. And for the first time in United States history, there are now more independent voters in the United States than Democrats and Republicans combined. It's 51%. It's never happened before. You're one of millions of people that are saying, I'm done with Team Red. I'm done with Team Blue. I don't trust either of them. I might vote for one or the other because what are my options? But I'm not on either team. I'm independent. And that got no news coverage at all. Nothing. The second thing is that, and I'm working day and night. My whole team is working to publicize this and elevate this conversation. The reason that we have primaries is so that ordinary Americans can weigh in before the November election, so that we have some say in who the candidates are going to be, who the front runners are, who are going to be the mainstream candidates that we get to go in. But what's happened over the last 50 years is that the parties have taken control of the primary system. So these are publicly funded elections. They're publicly administered. They're run by the government. They're not private elections. And yet small little groups of partisans in different ways have taken control of it, and they determine who gets to vote in those primaries and who gets to run in those primaries. And so we, the people, are oftentimes faced with, no candidates on the ballot. We're not allowed to vote. There's signs like in Tennessee saying you might be prosecuted if you vote. And we end up with a situation with two of the most unpopular candidates in American history facing off against each other in November. I'm sorry for my dog, but he's very excitable today.
Hey, we're all emotional right now. I understand. Let me ask you this. Do you believe that our current options for 2024 for president, do you think this is a direct result of this? And this is a stupid question now that I'm verbalizing it. This two-party system and the way that they have manipulated the voting process. Like, is this their fault essentially?
Yes, it is. That's the simple answer. I think that one of the things that's so tricky about this, Gabe, is that I think that the two-party system, the two-party system functioned for many years. It functioned very well. It kept America stable through the turbulent 1960s, through the turbulent post-war America, through global affairs. It was a very, post-World War II has been a challenging environment, and the two-party system allowed us to navigate and engage different issues of civil rights and so forth and so on. The biggest selling point of the two-party system was stability. And now the two-party system is actually creating instability in the country because they are they're clamping down on the ability of ordinary Americans to have a voice and to speak. Hey, wow. Gabe, what should I do about my dog? Let me just pause here for a minute and I'll lock him out, or what do you want to do?
Yeah, we can just. Sorry about this. No, you're fine. Leave it running. Go take her out, and,
right,
and we'll just
take my dog out here. Just give me 1 second.
No, you're fine. You're fine. While John is gone, for anybody that is live streaming, I think I will. Oh, that was quick. I was just going to have to go on a monologue. I was just making stuff up. Okay,
no,
good. That was easy.
He's been sleeping all day, and as soon as I log on, he decides to get up and bark. What am I going to do?
That's the way that is. Pets and kids. That's what they do. I've always been someone who sort of thumbed my nose at people who would complain about the two-party system, right? Like, and this is just me admitting this. And now I've finally seen the light. I think a lot of people it's hard not to now. Like this situation that we are in currently, it's almost like, it's not even like taking the blinders off. Like, if you can see and you are not indoctrinated enough, it's obvious at this point that whatever we have right now isn't working. Now, you mentioned that the parties basically are saying who is allowed to vote in primaries, and then you mentioned the parties are basically saying who's allowed to run in primaries. And that's something I know firsthand about, parties saying who can and can't vote in them. Right? I have experience with that. It's interesting when you say the parties are now choosing who can and who cannot run, and you referenced the Democratic primary with Kennedy, Dean Phillips. Are there any other situations like locally where this is happening too, where a party's like, oh, you're not conservative enough, or you're not liberal enough, or maybe you are conservative, but you're too moderate. We want to keep the most extreme candidate on this ballot and make sure they win this primary. Is that happening locally around the country?
Yeah. I mean, typically the way it works is that to get on the ballot, if you want to run as a Democrat or Republican, you have two routes to the ballot. And again, there's lots of state variation of this. So this is a simplification. But the way you get your name on the ballot is if you're an insider, you get the votes at the convention and they just put you on the ballot. If you're an outsider and insurgent, you have to go out and gather signatures to get on the ballot. And they've made those rules extremely difficult. And there's a whole cottage industry in many states. I lived in New York for many years of kicking people off the ballot for things like, oh, that person signed their name on the petition in blue ink and they have to do it in black ink. Or they put their name as Joe Johnson, but their name is Joe Johnson Jr. And so we're kicking, that's disqualified. So a lot of people have difficulty getting on the ballot. The Florida Democratic Party took it a step further in this past election. So Dean Phillips went out and gathered signatures, and the Democratic Party of Florida had a meeting, like the executive committee, 12 people, and they just said, we're not having a primary. We're canceling the primary. Joe Biden is our candidate. Why bother having a vote? And we don't care that this is a taxpayer-funded election that's, run by the people. We're just saying it's canceled. And the government said, okay, fine. So it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And it's, in my opinion, the undemocratic nature of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, though they have different issues. Actually, Trump actually faced a more competitive primary than Biden did in this election. And that has to be talked about honestly. Nikki Haley was allowed to run in the Republican primary. Robert Kennedy and Dean Phillips were not allowed to run in the Democratic primary. It's contributing to this sense of disempowerment, of like, how do I get my voice expressed? It's like these organizations are working against me to, keep my voice out of politics. Now, there are loyal Trump supporters and loyal Biden supporters that are like, hey, the system's working fine. I don't know what your complaint is, but that's a small majority of the American people. That's 15% of America.
Before we boil this down to a state level conversation, because I do want to talk about Tennessee at length, because this is where a lot of this, primary voting, I don't say opposition, but threatening of being prosecuted for voting in a primary of which you're not a bona fide member, the ambiguity of the wording of the law, and I'm gonna put law in quotes as well, the signage at polling places. There's a lot of confusion around here right now. But before we get into that, can you talk a little bit about some of the success stories that your organization has seen across the country in certain states, like where they are able to enact either fully open primaries, or maybe they shifted from closed primaries to maybe partially open? Like, where are you seeing, what states are you seeing progress in that regard?
Well, yeah, and there's been some progress. And this is a year in which hopefully we're going to make a big leap forward. I started open primaries in 2009, and there was barely anything going on. Over the last 15 years, we've enacted nonpartisan primaries. No more Democratic primary, no more Republican Party primary. The parties aren't in charge of the primaries. The public is. We did that in California. We did that in Washington State. We've done that in Alaska. We passed open primaries, meaning, okay, the parties still run the primaries, but at least independent voters get a choice to pick. We did that in Colorado. We did that in Maine. In Maine, we got a bipartisan coalition together of Democratic and Republican legislators, and they passed it with a supermajority. So it was a great effort to break through the Team Red and Team Blue and just do what's best for Maine. This year, there's going to be referendum on the ballot in South Dakota, in Arizona, in Colorado, to go fully nonpartisan, in Idaho, in Montana, and Nevada. And if we're able to win even half of those campaigns, it's going to really accelerate the momentum on this conversation of, hey, we have to get the parties out of the business of running the primaries, because they do what's best for themselves, not what's best for the voters. And that's increasingly a problem.
Let me ask you this. What does a nonpartisan primary look like? Like, I'm asking for myself too, because I'm trying to how does that function?
Yeah, what's interesting is that most of us, 85% of local elections, have some kind of nonpartisan primary. Like that's how we all elect our mayors and city council, most of us. But basically what it looks like is you have a first round, a primary, call it a primary, but it's not really a primary anymore. It's just the first round of voting, and that takes place in June or September, whenever. And on that day, every voter is eligible to vote. Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green, Peace and Freedom, Constitutional Party, Independent, no party. It doesn't matter how you're registered to vote. You go down to the poll and everybody gets the same ballot and all the candidates are on the ballot. So let's say there's 7 candidates for state assembly, 5 Republicans, a Democrat, and a Libertarian. There's 4 candidates for U.S. Senate, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. There's 6 candidates for Congress, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and a Green. And then you, as a voter, you get to vote for whoever you want for each office. So you might say, you know what? I really want this Democrat to be my congressman, but I want this Republican to be my U.S. senator, and I'm gonna gamble. I'm gonna vote for this Green Party candidate for assembly, and I'm gonna vote for a Libertarian over here for state senate. You get to vote for whoever you want, and then whoever gets the most votes in the primaries, either the top 2 candidates, the top 3, the top 4, different states are experimenting. They go to the general election. It's no longer based on party; it's based on popularity. The most popular candidates go forward.
How is that different than ranked choice voting?
Well, ranked choice voting is a method by which you rank your choices.
Okay.
And so a nonpartisan primary can be combined with ranked choice voting, like in Alaska, but it doesn't require it. Like in California and Washington, we have a nonpartisan primary, but we don't have ranked choice voting. The top 2 candidates go from the primary to the general election, and it's a head-to-head. And there's a lot of debate about which is better, and the people are going to decide that. And frankly, I don't think we need a single model. I think people should experiment with these things, and see what works best in their state. So the benefits of this are that, think about this logically, Gabe. Let's say you're running for assembly, and you know that every single voter in your district is eligible to vote for you in the primary. Democrat, Republican, everybody, independent, everybody. Well, you're going to organize your campaign to go talk to everybody. You're not just going to talk to the people that agree with you. You're going to talk to the people that are, might not agree with you on everything. You're going to build a base and a coalition because you want to get from the primary to the general election. And if all you have is a narrow band of supporters, which is how you win a party primary, the way you win a party primary is not by talking to people that are not in your party, not in your tribe, not in your faction. So it changes the whole dynamics of what makes successful politicians, and voters love it because more and more Americans want to be able to vote for a Democrat for this, a Republican for that, a third party for this, an independent for that. They don't want to be locked into, hey, I only can vote for Democratic candidates or only Republican candidates. People don't vote that way anymore.
And that's what democracy is. I mean, I think that's because what we're seeing in Tennessee is the exact opposite of that. What you just described is like a worst case scenario. This is it. We've got a District 73 House race coming up, primary, between our former county mayor and then the incumbent, who is as far right wing as you can get. And there is no opponent waiting after this primary. Right. This is the election.
Right.
Yeah. And it's hugely important just because of the philosophies of both of these men. Like, they're completely different. And all they are campaigning to, at least one specifically, is that narrow band of people because of the confusion surrounding the primaries and all of that. And we'll get into that in a minute. But I do want to ask you this. Do you think there is I know you said we should experiment with the types, but do you have a personal preference on what you think is sort of like your favorite kind of voting, whether it is the ranked choice or the nonpartisan primaries, or everybody has a shot? Like, do you have a preference on what you think is the best?
I really don't. I mean, I think nonpartisan primaries to me, the big change, here's the big change. And then the other stuff is small details. The big change is who's in charge? Who's in charge? Are the political parties in charge, or are the people in charge? I want the people in charge. I want every voter to be able to vote in every election. Once that's decided, then fine, experiment with how you conduct it. What date do you combine your primaries on a similar day? Do you use ranked choice? That's all great, and people should experiment with that. To me, though, the game changer is These primaries were meant for we, the people, to have a voice, and they've been hijacked by the political parties, which are private organizations. They're private. They should not be running the elections. They should be participating in the elections. I mean, think of the scandal. Think of what the scandal would be if we found out that the New York Yankees secretly control the umpires union. And they decided which umpires got to work at Yankee Stadium and which there'd be a national scandal. Like, no, the teams can't control the process. They need to participate, not control. So once you do that, hey, I'm all for it. Top 2, top 3, top 4, ranked choice, approval voting, whatever you want to combine, but we got to get the parties out of the business of running the elections.
How has this train of conversation not gotten more traction? And it's so funny to me because I think I've had an inclination that whatever system we have is not okay and not right. And I really saw that in 2022 when I crossed over to vote in the county mayoral election and just called all kinds of hell for it. And then you and I started talking and I was like, yeah, all of this makes sense. But have we just been so numb to the idea of this is the system that we've been given, so we think this is the only option?
Well, I'm really in the thick of this, Gabe. So what I see is snowballing interest in this. And I'll tell you a story. So Nick Reed is an Air Force veteran. He owns a coffee shop in Rapid City, South Dakota. It's a very conservative area of the country. And there's a ballot referendum this year to go to nonpartisan primaries. And he was asked to speak at a political meeting, and I'm not making this up. The name of the political group is the Wingnuts. They're like a very far right, super conservative. They love Trump. They're against the open primary. They want to maintain the status quo. And they had a meeting, and he said, I'm going to go speak to these people. And by the end of the meeting, he'd won half of them over. How? Here's how we won him over. He said, wait a minute. I hear over and over from Trump Republicans that you guys are sick and tired of the rhinos. You don't like these rhinos, these fake Republicans that join your party and then they vote in your primary. The reason they're joining your party is because in order to vote in South Dakota, you have to join the Republican Party. You have to join a private organization in order to have the right to vote in a public election. So there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of South Dakotans that are registered Republican, even though they're not Republicans, because the only election in South Dakota is the Republican primary. So he's saying this to this group of far-right Republicans, and they're saying, yeah, why do we want the current system? It forces people to join our party. We want to get rid of those people. We want the Republican Party to be a private club of people that feel and think the same way. And I agree with them. They should have the right to be a private club, a private organization, without denying us, we the people, the right to vote.
Right. So, and that's what, sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, so what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of light bulbs going off among liberals, conservatives, libertarians, socialists, people that don't know what ideology they are, people that are all over the place. And that's America. And that's what I love about this country, is like just how all over the place we all are. But people are realizing this is not an issue of, oh, this is going to help the liberals or this is going to help the conservatives. No, this is going to help the people. I don't care how conservative you are. I don't care if you love Trump, love Biden, love Bernie, love whoever. This is going to help you, and it's going to give you more choice, more power, more agency, more capacity to give expression to what you believe. And those are the light bulbs that are going off, and it's really exciting.
It is. And like, even just talking to you, because I have such trepidation about this primary coming up. Early voting starts Friday, and I'm like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to vote in this Republican primary, right? And even though we're an open primary state, regardless of all the ambiguity surrounding whatever the law is, I'm still going to do it because it's my district and it's an important election, and the chips are going to fall where they may. But when I have these conversations with you, I'm like, this makes so much sense. Like, whatever the logic of the law is, And in the Republicans' defense, they'll say, well, the Democrats made this law, in the 70s or 80s. And that's fine, whatever. It wasn't right then, it's not right now. Like you can't use that excuse anymore. But these are the conversations that I hope get out there to everyone else, because like you said, in South Dakota, what I'm hearing here in West Tennessee, and I would consider where I live rural compared to larger cities around the country, I'm hearing these far right groups say, rhinos, we want to make sure that real Republicans are running. And this is the answer. It's not to privatize these primaries like they're doing. It's to open it up to everybody and let the best man or woman win. Yeah. Because I think when democracy works its best is when you have a mix of ideologies, having conversation, compromising, and making a decision that's in the best interest of the constituents as a whole. Like that's how this should work, but it's not working that way in Tennessee right now. And it's not working that way on the national level either.
No. And look, we've won in, California, Washington, Alaska, Colorado, Maine, but there's so much of the country that is controlled by either Team Blue or Team Red, and they don't look identical. But I'll tell you this right now, New York State, the bluest of the blue states, is as undemocratic and authoritarian as any MAGA county in the country. If people think it's, the MAGA people are bad and the Democrats are good, it's no. Power is about power, and both parties are guilty of consolidating power, keeping other people out, and not letting there be real competition. And look, competition is a core conservative value. I've learned this from some of our leaders in red states that are very conservative, and they're working on open primaries because they're like, look, 60% of our legislators run unopposed. If you run for office and you have no opponent, I guarantee you're going to get up to shenanigans.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to feel like, hey, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to get elected. So that's not good for democracy. And it's not good for the people. It's not good for conservatives. It's not good for anybody.
This is a question that's coming out of left field because it just hit me when you were saying that. Does outside money and political interest groups, how much sway do they have in a closed primary state? Or are those two things do they even correlate at all? I just had this pop in my head because in this District 73 race, we've got one candidate who's getting a ton of money from outside PACs that's funneled into here. And he's using it for advertising, campaigning, all of that stuff. And it just seems to me that you would be able, when you don't have competition, to, like you said, you're at the whim of whoever gives you the most money or whatever organization wants to endorse you. You're going to do what they want you to do rather than what the people want you to do if you're not worried about losing an election.
I mean, look, we live in a capitalist system. I don't care what rules you have, open system, closed system. People with a lot of money are always going to have influence. I don't care what, like, we should just, again, I'm not saying that to be cynical. I'm not saying there's nothing we can do about it, but there is no silver bullet. People with a lot of money always find ways to get what they want. I think that the thing I think about is, how do we give ordinary people more power? Not how do we try to limit the power of the wealthy? Because they're very good. The wealthy employ lawyers and lobbyists, and they know how to get around every rule and put their, okay, all right. But how do we give ordinary people more power? That to me is the creative challenge. And to me, open primaries is not the silver bullet. It's not the answer to that question, but it's a step in that direction. Mm-hmm. That's going to make more things possible in terms of the American people having more power. So hopefully we don't end up with these situations. I mean, it's helpful, Gabe, just to pause for a minute. We're the most powerful country in the world. We're like this golden beacon of democracy. And we're having a presidential election in which 75% of the country does not want these two candidates running. How do we have that? And it almost feels like, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Mm-mm. No,
That's a
we just have to hold our
power issue.
nose.
That's a power issue. We, the people, don't have enough power. These insiders get to determine everything for us, and that's not good.
You know, I think that the sexy conversation is the presidential election. I just finished an article for a statewide publication here, and I'm arguing that the most important election for Tennesseans isn't November 5th or whenever it's going to be. It's August 1st. Like the August 1st primaries, that's the most important election that they are going to vote in this year. And the reason I'm saying that is because as we sort of boil this down to a state level conversation about Tennessee in particular, because a lot of our listeners live in Tennessee, Tennessee is a supermajority, trifecta supermajority for 14 years in a row. Republican governor, Republican House controlled, Republican controlled Senate. In the last 5 or 6 years, they have gone precipitously further and further to the right, where you have surveys of Tennesseans where 80% want some type of gun reform, and it's been the opposite. You have 80% of Tennesseans don't want the trigger ban in effect, where women's health care is completely taken out of the hands of medical providers and women, right? Because of the threat of prosecution, the law is ambiguous. So you have the general population, Republican and Democratic citizens are like, this is too far, this is too much, we want something different. But nobody's listening in Nashville to that. In fact, they just keep going further and further to the right. So there's been this crop of moderate Republicans who, because of personal situations they've experienced in Tennessee, or just because they don't like the direction of the legislature, they're running now, right? They're running in these primaries. And my argument is the best way to bring the conversation back towards the middle is to vote in these August 1st primaries, regardless of your party affiliation. And the flip side of that is out of Nashville, our governor, who is really touting a school voucher plan, like that's his big piece of legislation. He's hanging his whole political career on this, and it failed this time, to everybody's surprise, mine as well. But now he's going around and he's endorsing these House and Senate candidates in each of these counties who he knows is going to vote for this voucher bill when it comes up in next session. So he's out there campaigning for them in their primaries. Secretary of State is saying if you vote in this primary and you are not a bona fide Republican, then you could be prosecuted, signs are posted. So this is where we are. And my argument is like, you have to think about this yourself, take whatever personal risk you want to take, and still vote in whatever primary you feel compelled to vote in, regardless of what you consider yourself. Because it is that important, because this is where Tennessee is. Do you, with your organization, are there any other states that are similar to Tennessee in that regard, where they have a supermajority, Democrat or Republican, and they are squeezing the primaries as tight as they can simply to keep their party in power?
No, Tennessee's a real outlier. I mean, the sign that you reference that says you can be prosecuted if you vote and you're not a bona fide party member is singular in the country. It's a real outrage, and it's designed to really intimidate voters. Other states are not that blatant. They have other techniques to keep turnout low. Other states just simply don't allow independents to vote at all. So they cut out 30% of the population. Just boom, you're not allowed to vote. So it's the thing about the Tennessee thing that's so hard. And I really hope the League of Women Voters, and I know you're a plaintiff in that lawsuit, I really hope you're successful. And we're doing everything in our power to support that lawsuit. In fact, we got 30 Tennessee voters to sign letters to the editor and send them to their local papers just last week in support of the lawsuit. Hopefully, a good number of them will be published.
Yeah.
The thing that's so insidious about it is that it's like giving someone a beating without leaving any marks. It's like that kind of clever abuse. So the voters, first of all, they're going to go to the poll. They're going to see this sign. And first of all, it's confusing. It's poorly worded. It's not legal. But the subjective impact is going to be, wait, I could go to jail for voting today? Oh, I'm not doing that. I'm going home. And they're just going to go home and never talk about it again because it's embarrassing. Because people feel like, wait, I didn't know the rules. I'm stupid. It's designed to make people feel stupid, to feel illegitimate. And if you do that over and over, election after election, within a short period of time, you'll get 2% turnout in the primaries, 3%. And that's exactly what these partisan insiders want. They don't want people voting in the primaries. They want their people voting in the primaries. So I think you have to understand this is a heavy duty move, what's going on in Tennessee. And it's a very clever tactic. Because as I said, it's designed to abuse people without leaving any scars, any bruises.
I like the term insidious that you used. It's very descriptive and very accurate.
Yeah.
There was a stat, and I'm going to misquote it, so I'm going to ask you, and I don't expect you to know Tennessee's statistics, but there are percentages of uncontested, let me word this the right way. Do you know about the percentage of primaries in certain states where there is no opponent waiting in the general on the other side?
Yeah.
Is that the majority of those, or?
Yeah. We analyzed all 50 states.
Okay.
And it ranges from the high 30s to the lower 70s of elections that are decided in the primary where there's only one candidate on the ballot in November. It's funny. What state do you think is the worst? Has the least competitive elections in America? What would be your guess?
Okay. If I'm, I would never have said New York before our conversation, but now I'm leaning that way. But if before this conversation, I would have said somewhere in the South, would have been my guess.
It's Massachusetts.
Really?
The birthplace of Lexington and Concord. Yeah, 71% of legislators ran unopposed in 2022. Tennessee is in the I think the low 50s, so it's not the worst and it's not the best. But here's what you have to understand, Gabe. When I say low 50s, that means 50% of legislators run unopposed. Another 40% run against a token candidate that they don't even have to campaign, and they're going to win because there's a handful of Democratic areas in Tennessee and a bunch of Republican areas, and it's pretty safe that if you win the primary in that area, sure, there might be someone against you on the ballot, but they're really a young person. They're getting some experience. They might get 28% of the vote. No one takes them seriously. So 9 out of 10 legislators, once they win their primary, they're like, smooth sailing. I can go to the Bahamas. My job is done. It's only 1 out of 10. And this is nationally. 1 out of 10 sweats it in the November election.
So what you're saying is 90% of primary elections are essentially, those are the competitive elections for office. So in Tennessee, bringing it back to this conversation again, in Tennessee, the competitive races are the races that the Secretary of State and other legislators in Nashville are trying to keep the most people from voting in. And I probably worded that in a confusing way, but that's what they're doing with these signs and with these threats of prosecution. They don't want voters voting in these in the competitive races, because you're exactly in Tennessee I would even venture to say, you said 90% is a national stat. In Tennessee, probably I would say it's 98%. If you're a Republican, you've got a Democrat waiting on the other side. Once you win your primary, if you're a Republican, it's almost 100% chance you're going to win that general election. So this is why I am trying to be so
they become so important, because that's where the real decisions are made.
Yeah. But before we're getting up to the 45-minute mark, but before we wrap up, I do want to give you some time to really talk about your organization, what you all are doing. And I know we mentioned early on, like some really good work that you've seen happen in certain states around here, in the country. And you said this is like bubbling right now, this idea of this trying to break out of the tribalism mode of a two-party system. So tell us a little bit about open primaries. what you've done up to this point and sort of how you see this organization even being more relevant now in the socio-political world.
Yeah. So Open Primaries, we're a national organization. We're nonprofit. We consider ourselves an open source organization and a catalytic organization. What I mean by that is we want to inspire people all over the country to take up this issue and work on it in their state. We're not looking to control the conversation. We're not looking to tell people this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. We're looking to stimulate a broad-based movement of people that are coming together for different reasons. You know, business people want an open primary because they want legislators that are going to be more rational. Progressives come to it from one angle. Conservatives come at another angle. There's all kinds of motivations. And the role we play is how do we weave this together into a cohesive movement? And we're having amazing success. I just got off the phone with Chuck Coughlin, who is running a campaign in Arizona. They just submitted 600,000 signatures yesterday to get a referendum on the ballot. 600,000 they gathered. And he said to me, this is the third time they've tried to get open primaries in Arizona. The first time in 2012, business leaders said to him, what? I don't even know what you're talking about. And they wouldn't write a check. The second time in 2016, they said, okay, I get this. I think it makes sense, but I'm not writing a check. I'm going to give to the candidates. Now what they're saying is, oh, I get this. We desperately need this for our state. Our legislature is completely unaccountable to the people. He raised $7 million locally in Arizona for this campaign. And back in 2016, couldn't raise any money at all. So the tide is turning, and that's because a lot of different people are coming to the table and saying, we got to get this done. And it's exciting.
That's incredible. I appreciate so much what your organization does. I'm sorry that I didn't know about it sooner than 2022. I really am, because I might have divorced myself from my party long before that had I known about this and been a lot more informed about primary voting in general. Thank you so much for taking almost an hour to talk about this. It's always an enjoyable and informative experience. You do really well with it. I learn something new every time we talk, so I really do appreciate it.
And Gabe, you really need to know this. The lawsuit that you're working on, the League of Women Voters is working on, everybody around the country has their eyes on this. This is a really important lawsuit, because if the legislature gets away with this in Tennessee, where they can put up this sign intimidating people, right now they're the only state doing it. Trust me, other states are going to follow suit. They're like, oh, if we could get away with this, we're going to do it all over the place. So good luck with that. And we're here to help in any way that we can.
I appreciate it. I've always liked a good fight. So here we are.
Good.
Thanks so much, John. I really do appreciate it.
Great. You got it. Take care, Gabe.